They saw your kindness as weakness. They laughed at your innocence as though it were ignorance. In a world intoxicated with power, your gentleness disturbed them, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. And what is right will always unsettle the hearts of those who have chosen what is easy, what is selfish, what is cruel. You were not weak, you were rare. But they could not understand rarity. They only knew how to destroy what they did not possess. So they hurt you, not with fists or fury, but with something worse: mockery, betrayal, calculated silence. You were met not with gratitude for your purity, but with resentment. They mocked you for still believing in good things. They whispered about you behind doors you once walked through with trust. They smiled to your face and scoffed at your heart. And in doing so, they revealed not your weakness, but their own. They bragged. They paraded what they had: status, approval, relationships, influence, as though life were a game of possessions and performance. They measured worth by what they could show off, not by what they could sacrifice. They thought the loudness of their achievements could silence the quiet power of your soul. They believed that by putting you down, they could lift themselves higher. But God was watching. The God who sees in secret, who reads hearts, not headlines, who measures depth, not decoration. He took note. He saw the tears that never made it past your eyelids. He saw the moment you chose mercy instead of revenge. He saw the day you remained kind to the one who used your love as leverage. And in that seeing, he did not forget. He wrote it down. There is a silence in heaven before justice speaks, a silence that many mistake for inaction. But justice does not move in haste, it moves in fullness. And when God moves, it is never partial. What they bragged about, what they lifted high with pride, is already marked, not because you wished for their fall, but because they trampled what was sacred. God allows certain rises so that the fall is not questioned. They needed their platform, their circle, their admiration, not for growth, but for pride. They used their blessings like trophies, not tools, and when they mocked you, when they hurt the one thing they didn't understand, purity, they unknowingly mocked the God who shaped that purity. You were His design. Your tenderness was not naivety, it was His fingerprint on your life. And those who dared to defile His fingerprints must face the moment when He lifts His hand from their blessings. What they bragged about will begin to rot, not all at once, but steadily. The very things they used to belittle you will become the source of their discomfort. Their name will no longer open doors, it will echo with absence. Their circle will not celebrate them, it will shrink. Their confidence will begin to flicker, because nothing stands tall forever if it was built on cruelty. And you, the one they counted out, the one who cried in silence and forgave without applause, you will rise. Not because you schemed, but because you stayed still. Not because you fought back, but because you let God see it through. This is not the kind of restoration that makes the news. It is the kind that turns heads in quiet awe. The kind that makes people ask, how? And the answer is simple: grace. Do not think it was a waste. Do not believe for a second that your purity was useless, or that your kindness made you a target in vain. You were a mirror, and mirrors don't lie, they just reveal. You revealed who they truly were, and that frightened them more than anything else. So they tried to break the mirror. But mirrors, when shattered, do not lose their truth. They reflect it more widely. And God collects every shard. Now He's rebuilding you. Not back to what you were, but forward into something stronger. Something still pure, but now untouchable. Something still gentle, but no longer accessible to those who once mistook it for fragility. God is not just vindicating you, He is educating the world through you. He is making a statement, not in anger, but in justice. Do not harm what I've called holy. So let them lose what they once bragged about. Let the silence surround their pride like fog surrounds a dying fire. Let them feel the emptiness of the things they once used to define themselves. Because what you carry, your heart, your light, your purity, was never for sale, never for display, never for destruction. It was for Him, and what belongs to Him, He always restores. They once thought they were untouchable. Their lives were filled with noise, applause, attention, admiration, all echoing around them like a fortress built of vanity. And in that noise, they believed they were safe. They believed their actions against you were buried under the distractions of success. But noise cannot drown out truth. God does not get lost in the crowd. He listens in the silence. And it was in the silence after you were hurt, the quiet after the betrayal, the stillness after the lies, where heaven began to move. The world celebrates the loud. It rewards the arrogant. It gives platforms to those who know how to perform. And yet heaven chooses the quiet ones, the wounded, the overlooked, the hearts who remained clean in a world so ready to stain them. That was you. You never wanted to compete. You only wanted to love. You never asked for more. You only hoped for honesty. But your purity revealed their emptiness. Your honesty exposed their pretending. Your silence made their noise feel hollow. So they hurt you, not because you wronged them, but because your presence reminded them of everything they were not. And when they walked away, when they shamed you or slandered you, when they mocked your softness as though it were some flaw to fix, they thought they had won. They thought power belonged to those who could wound without guilt. They thought they had the upper hand. But power is never measured in domination. It's revealed in what remains when everything else is gone. And while they clung to their outward lives, you were being strengthened inwardly. While they built towers of attention, you built an altar in the quiet. And heaven saw it. There is a moment in the story of every righteous soul when it seems the wicked prevail, when the innocent are laughed at, when the dishonest climb high, when those who deceive are praised, and those who are sincere are shamed. But that moment is never the ending. It's only the pause before justice unfolds. Because the higher someone climbs on false strength, the harder the fall when God removes His hand. And He will, not because you ask for revenge, but because justice is His nature. They used their gifts like weapons, their charm like a trap, their status like a shield. But nothing protects the proud when God decides to humble. You were not forgotten in your tears. You were being observed, remembered, honored in ways the world could never understand. And now, slowly, quietly, the unraveling begins, not in rage, but in righteousness. Not by your doing, but by God's. Because He will not let those who crush the pure continue unshaken. And still, He gives them time. Time to repent. Time to reflect. Time to see the mirror they broke and realize it was never about you, it was about their hearts. Because God would rather heal than punish. He would rather redeem than destroy. But if the proud remain unbent, then He will bend them. If the arrogant refuse to bow, then life will bow them by force. And when they begin to lose what they once boasted about, they'll remember you, not because you wished for their pain, but because your presence was the test they failed. What they bragged about was never truly theirs. It was borrowed. Borrowed breath, borrowed moments, borrowed influence. And now, one by one, the things they held tightly will begin to slip away. They will watch as the lights fade, as the attention drifts, as the support crumbles, and they will begin to ask why. But you will already know, not out of pride, but from pain transformed into wisdom. Because you remember when you cried for them, when you tried to understand them, when you prayed for them even as they hurt you. And now you understand what God was doing. He was not punishing you when you were abandoned. He was purifying you. He was not silent when you were mocked. He was separating you. He was not late when they bragged in your face. He was writing a story that could not end in injustice. Let them lose what they boasted of. Let the world learn that purity may be hidden, but it is never defeated. Let your life become the proof that staying kind is not weakness, it is power restrained. And let your restoration speak louder than their downfall. Because when God restores, He does not just give you back what was taken. He gives it back with meaning, with strength, with peace that cannot be imitated. And those who once bragged will finally realize that they were never the strong ones. You were. You still are. There comes a time in every story where the silence begins to speak louder than the noise. The ones who once stood on stages built of ego and applause begin to feel the weight of their own emptiness. The spotlight they once craved now burns instead of warms. Their words, once cheered, now echo back at them without meaning. And all the things they bragged about, the friends, the favor, the status, they begin to slip like water through a clenched fist, because you cannot hold on to what God never intended to bless through pride. They used your name like a joke, your kindness like a rug beneath their feet, your love like a test they thought they passed by walking away. But now they stand surrounded by everything they once flaunted and still feel alone. And there you are, no longer weeping, no longer pleading for understanding, no longer waiting for them to see your worth. You've grown, not because time healed you, but because truth rebuilt you. Every night you cried, God was reshaping your soul into something far more powerful than the applause they once lived for. He was giving you a voice, not to scream back, but to speak life. He was giving you strength, not to break others, but to carry what they never could. You became everything they pretended to be, and now, while they lose what they used to define themselves, you are gaining something eternal. You see, people who hurt the pure never understand the cost until the silence becomes unbearable. They assume their wins are forever. They assume they've outsmarted you, outgrown you, outranked you. But God's justice doesn't rush. It waits, it watches, and then it moves. Not in a spectacle, but in a shift, a subtle, undeniable change, a cooling of the attention, a soft distancing of the people they once controlled, a growing discomfort in the blessings they once displayed. It's not punishment, it's exposure. It's not vengeance, it's revelation. And as they fall, they will be reminded of you. They will remember the way you never fought dirty, the way you never defended yourself with hate. They will recall how you remained soft in the face of cruelty, how your eyes carried tears and strength at the same time. They will wish they had seen you then for who you truly were. But God hid you. He covered you while they mocked. He protected the treasure while they trampled the wrapping. And now that the wrapping is gone, now that the illusions are fading, what's left is you never needed to be loud. You never needed to prove yourself. You just needed to stay still long enough for their noise to crumble on its own. And it is, slowly, painfully, and publicly, not because you demanded it, but because heaven decided it. God will let them lose what they bragged about because they used it to hurt the one thing He cherishes most, a pure heart. Not a perfect heart, but a clean one, a sincere one. A heart that loved without calculation, that gave without asking, that hoped even when it was unwise to hope. And for that you were hurt. But God never wastes the pain of the pure. He stores it, He multiplies it, and then, when the time is right, He turns it into favor. You may not see their fall because you're not looking anymore. You've outgrown that season. You've let go not only of them, but of the desire for vindication. And yet it will come, not to elevate your ego, but to confirm your journey, to remind the world that humility is not a weakness, that love is not a liability, and that God defends what He designs. Let the world learn. Let those who mocked your heart feel the silence of God's absence. Let those who took without guilt learn what it feels like to reach and find nothing. Let those who bragged be humbled, not by your doing, but by the steady unraveling of a life built on falsehood. And let you, the one they counted out, be raised, not to shame them, but to reflect God's justice. Because He never forgets. He never ignores the cry of the one who was hurt for being pure, and while they laughed, while they climbed, while they celebrated themselves, heaven was writing a different ending. Not a tragedy for you, but a testimony. Not a downfall for them, but a lesson written in the language of consequences. You were never the fool, you were the seed. And now, as they begin to lose what they flaunted, you begin to bloom in places they never thought you'd rise from. And what they never understood, what their pride blinded them from seeing, was that God often disguises His greatest works in seasons of loss. While they celebrated what they built with flattery and show, you were buried, you were dismissed, you were left alone with your pain and your prayers. But just as the seed must disappear into the darkness before it can rise into the light, so too did God place you in the unseen places, not to forget you, but to form you. Because elevation that comes from Him always begins in the depths. They mistook your silence for surrender. They mistook your withdrawal for defeat. But you were not retreating, you were being refined. You were being protected from the disease of ego, from the infection of needing to be seen, from the curse of constant applause. And while they ran toward the crowd, you stayed in the secret place. While they clung to image, you clung to integrity. And that is why their towers will fall and your foundation will rise. God does not restore with scraps. He restores with intention. He gives beauty for ashes, not silence for silence. And when He returns what was lost, He does so with interest. So when you feel the shift, when you sense the peace returning, when opportunities begin to find you without you chasing them, when your name is spoken in rooms you never entered, remember this: it is not karma, it is not coincidence, it is the justice of heaven speaking through the story of your life. The God who saw the pain also saw the potential, and He has not forgotten what they did to you while you were only trying to love. And for them it will begin slowly. The unraveling never looks dramatic at first. It looks like missed calls that used to come often. It looks like silence from those who once chased their shadow. It looks like success that no longer satisfies. It looks like the slow awareness that they broke something they cannot rebuild, the trust of someone who only wanted to see them win. But there are some things in life you cannot fake your way through. There are some falls you cannot disguise as growth. When God begins to remove His hand from someone's life, what once looked like favor becomes exposed for what it was: borrowed time. Let them remember you in that time, not with guilt that you asked for, but with truth they can't ignore. Let your name return to their mind in the quiet hours when the crowd is gone. Let your tears echo louder than their laughter once did. Let your kindness remind them of the chance they had to love something real and chose instead to crush it. This is not revenge, this is reckoning, not your wrath, but God's whisper. You do not touch what I have called pure and walk away unchanged. You were not a phase in their life. You were the test they failed, and the consequences of that failure were never in your hands. They were in His. That is why you never needed to curse them. You never needed to defend yourself. Your innocence became your defense. Your silence became your case. Your pain became your proof. And heaven ruled in your favor long before they even realized there was a judgment coming. So what they bragged about will become heavy. It will turn bitter. Because when something is lifted higher than it deserves, it begins to decay. And while they hold on tighter, they will not understand why it no longer fills them. That is the curse of pride. It consumes until there is nothing left to feed it. And that is what awaits those who harm the pure without remorse. But your journey is not to watch them fall. Your journey is to rise in grace, to rebuild with wisdom, to walk in rooms not with vengeance, but with peace, to stand not taller than them, but deeper in spirit. Your growth is not a reaction to their betrayal. It is a reflection of God's favor. You are not becoming something to prove them wrong. You are becoming everything they could never destroy. So let it unfold. Let them face the silence. Let them lose what they once thought made them untouchable. Let them wrestle with the weight of their choices. And you, stay rooted. Stay grounded in who you are. Because, in the end, purity always outlasts pride. And God always finishes the story He began. In the darkness, there is something holy about surviving what was meant to break you. Not just physically surviving, but emotionally, spiritually, quietly. You endured without turning bitter. You wept, but never wished harm. You grieved, but never plotted revenge. You questioned why, but you never stopped hoping there was still good somewhere in this world. And that alone makes you rare, because most people, when they are torn apart for being good, become what tore them. They adopt the coldness. They learn the arrogance. They build walls so tall they can no longer feel the sunlight on their own skin. But you didn't. You remained human. You remained soft. And that is why heaven is with you. You see, they didn't just hurt someone. They harmed something sacred. Not sacred because of perfection, but sacred because of intention. You didn't come into their lives pretending. You didn't use love as leverage. You didn't play with hearts or manipulate silence. You came honest, open, vulnerable, and they used that to their advantage. That is not a misstep. That is cruelty. And cruelty against the pure is never forgotten. Even when the world doesn't see it, God does. Even when there is no audience to witness your breaking, He records every detail in the language of justice. And so what happens now is not just the loss of things. They're not merely losing opportunities or attention or relationships. They are being shown their own reflection, slowly, painfully, because when someone mocks the pure, it is not the pure who fall. It is the mocker who exposes their own lack. Their attack is not strength, it's confession. It says more about their hollowed spirit than it ever said about your heart. And now, with nothing left to fuel their ego, they sit among their trophies and find them dusty. They reach for applause and find the room empty. They try to retell the old stories of their success, only to realize no one is listening anymore. Because favor without character is a flame without fuel, it cannot burn forever. And you, the one they left behind in their chase for status, you became the one God kept hidden for a reason. Because not every blessing is for public consumption. Sometimes God hides his finest work in the shadows, so it cannot be corrupted. He allows you to be misunderstood so he can purify your motives. He lets you be overlooked so your heart learns not to depend on human validation. And in that process, you became something they never were. Real. When God starts lifting you, it won't look like revenge. It will look like peace. It will feel like stability. It will sound like wisdom in your voice and gentleness in your steps. And the people who once watched you cry will watch you carry joy. They will wonder how you still smile. They will wonder why your name is being mentioned in places you've never stepped foot. They'll try to understand your grace, but they can't, because grace is not logical, it's divine. And it belongs to those who pass through fire without becoming ashes. So now they sit in silence, holding what they once boasted about, wondering why it no longer feels like victory. Their influence brings no peace. Their image holds no power. Their friendships feel fragile. Because everything built on pride eventually implodes. And the higher they built it, the longer the fall. Let it happen, not with bitterness in your heart, but with trust in God's design. Let their unraveling teach them what your love once tried to. Let their silence echo back the very warnings your spirit once whispered. Let their loss become the soil for their awakening. Because sometimes the only way to reach the heart of the arrogant is to remove the very thing they thought made them untouchable, and through it all, keep your heart clean. Do not pick up the weapons they used on you. Do not repeat the cycle of destruction they lived by. You are not like them, and you were never meant to be. That's why it hurts so deeply, because you loved from a place they never reached, and now you will be lifted to a place they cannot follow, not because you prayed for their downfall, but because you stayed faithful through yours. This is the turning point. The unraveling of what was fake and the revealing of what was real, and your name, once dismissed, is now being rewritten in the records of heaven. Not as a victim, but as a vessel. Not as the broken, but as the chosen. What they lost will not return. What you gain cannot be stolen. And now, the final thread begins to weave itself into the fabric of the story. Not because it must end in triumph for appearances, but because it was always meant to arrive at truth. God does not author beginnings without preparing endings that echo eternity. And for you, the one who was wounded for being pure, that ending does not come in the form of revenge. It comes as restoration. Restoration not just of what you lost, but of what you were never allowed to fully become when you were surrounded by those who feared your light. There is a hush that falls over the soul when you begin to realize that you have truly healed. Not the kind of healing that pretends the pain never happened, but the kind that carries the scar with dignity. The kind that allows you to remember without bleeding. You look back and see not the destruction, but the deliverance. You see not the betrayal, but the boundary God drew for your protection. What once seemed like rejection is now understood as reading, and what they boasted about, what they used as weapons of worth against your heart, is no longer relevant. Not because it disappeared, but because you outgrew the need to care. There is no noise left in their triumphs. The gold they once showed off has dulled in your eyes. The connections they used to make you feel small have frayed into irrelevance. Because when God lifts you, your soul no longer craves the applause of broken people. You no longer look to prove them wrong. You simply live right. That is the deepest kind of justice. To become whole in a world that tried to shatter you, and to walk with peace when they expected you to fall apart forever. While you bloom, they begin to face themselves. something they never truly did while they had someone else to blame, to use, to cast aside. The same rooms that once echoed with their laughter now sit heavy with silence. The same people who once surrounded them with praise now disappear into the background. Why? Because when someone builds their identity by demeaning others, they become dependent on the illusion of superiority. And illusions don't last. Not under heaven's gaze, not under God's timing. Let them feel it, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Let them finally understand that when they hurt someone pure, they weren't just harming a person, they were mocking the one who created that purity. And God does not let that mockery go unanswered, not because He's vengeful, but because He's just. And in His justice He does not humiliate, He humbles. He strips away the distractions, the indulgences, the praise, until all that's left is the truth. In that truth, they are forced to remember the one they laughed at, the one they dismissed, the one they walked over to reach their fragile sense of power. And while they search for something to fill the hollow spaces, you'll find your joy in the small things again, in the sun rising over a quiet morning, in the peace of not having to defend yourself, in the soft, still presence of a God who saw every moment and now fills your life with what cannot be taken, inner strength. That's what they never understood, that your worth was never in their hands, that your future was never dependent on their favor, that your purity was never weakness. It was evidence of God's breath inside of you. So walk forward now, not looking back to see who's watching, not wondering if they regret what they did. Let God deal with their story. Yours is just beginning. And it begins not with noise, but with stillness, not with public glory, but with private peace, not with outward proof, but with inward knowing. You survived what was meant to crush you. You kept your soul intact. You stood through storms they wouldn't have lasted a day in. And now, the season of divine reversal has arrived. Let them lose what they bragged about. Let them learn what true value is. Let them sit with the echo of your name in their conscience, not because you cursed them, but because they cursed themselves when they touched something God had called holy. You were pure, and for that you were heard. But God saw, God heard, and now God moves.